Which brings us to the fourth point, that God's plans have eternal consequences. Genesis 45:7, this is what Joseph said. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. What a magnificent truth. God has plans for your life, for consequences beyond your life. God has plans for your life, for consequences beyond your life. Will, I hope you will forgive me for using Bill as an example here. But on New Year's Eve day, Bill Crane went to be with the Lord. And Bill was saved 64 years ago, 1 month before he and Wilda were married. And who would have thought, back on that fall day of 1947, what God would do through Bill's life that would have eternal consequences? Not that Bill was perfect. He wasn't. But he was usable. He was a tool in God's toolbox. And who would have thought 64 years ago that God was planning on doing in and through Bill's life what he has accomplished? Think about this. His only child, Cinda, married Bruce Rosenbaum, who served on the church search committee to bring Gene Calhoun to First Baptist Church as our worship leader, who instituted a pageant which has been instrumental in leading thousands of people to Christ in the Kansas City area. And now Bruce is the chairman of the Pulpit Search Committee, which will have an enormous impact on the future generations of ministry in our church. And Bill's grandson, Nick, is serving on staff at First Baptist Church of Houston, and as a part of that ministry is reaching thousands of people for Christ in that region. Who would have thought that 64 years ago that God would begin this work that he planned millions of years ago to accomplish something that had eternal consequences? God's plans have eternal consequences. He's up to something in your life that extends way beyond you, far beyond you. Never, 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 never underestimate the consequences of what God is up to in your life. When you think that the conflict is greater than the consequences, you need to take a longer look at what God is doing. Never underestimate the consequences of what God is up to in your life. So you've been hurt. You've been pushed around. You've been ignored. You've been denied. You've been mistreated. You've been abused. You've been cheated. You've been lied to. You've been stolen from. You've been scorned. And you've wondered why God let that happen in your life. Psalm 10, verse 1 says it this way: "Why, Lord, do you stand off? Why do you stand far off? Why do you hide yourself in times of trouble?" It's possible to say in some cases that it was part of God's plan, but more than likely it was not. More than likely it was not God's plan to let those things happen. But in God's infinite wisdom and knowledge, he knew what was going to happen. And that didn't thwart his plan for you. It didn't thwart what he wanted to accomplish in and through your life. Now, I want us to go back to a verse that we looked at earlier, Jeremiah 29:11. "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper, to not harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." In spite of the fact that you have lost and that you have been harmed, and that you have been deeply hurt, maybe even almost completely destroyed. In spite of all of that, that wasn't God's plan. That wasn't God's plan. This verse says that his plan was to give you hope. The word for hope is what? Confident anticipation. That's what God is up to in your life, to create in your life a confident anticipation and, I love, there's the word, future. God's not looking at the past. He's looking at the future. What he can accomplish in and through your life. I'm so glad God's not looking at my past, going, remember that, what you did, remember that? Shit, man, oh man, that's just going to weigh heavy on you for the rest of your life, because I'm going to keep reminding you of it. God doesn't do that. God doesn't do that. God doesn't do that. God is in the business of planning his future through you. So what do you need to do about it? Well, one of the first things you need to do is quit planning your future and let God plan his future through you. You also need to accept the fact that you're God's creation, designed for his purpose, his plan. And that the conflict that comes along with his plan is just part of what God can accomplish in and through you in the midst of the difficulties. I love how King James says, Jeremiah 29:11. For I know the thoughts that I think toward you, says the Lord, thoughts of peace and not of evil, to give you an expected end. Isn't that great? God says, I know where it's going to end up. I know where it's going to end up. Those things that have happened in your life haven't changed where I know it's going to end up. I have an expected end for your life. I know where this is going. You just need to let me take you through the minefield. God is at work in your life to bring you through. And that's what he's up to in 2012. Will you see the resolution of his plans this year? Maybe. Maybe not. But he's still at work in your life to give you hope and a future. And your future